Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, the podcast where we discuss matters of national, international, and local importance in a calm, measured, and reasonable way to get to the heart of the matter. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. So, welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, we're inside Portsmouth City Council's latest full council meeting, the last one actually before the local elections in May. So on the agenda, there's the usual public deputations, the bringing of residents' voices straight into the chamber, a few key formal businesses like some declarations and some reappointments that were from an appointment that was made actually in the last meeting, and a packed set of emotions and debates tackling local priorities. So from the issues residents are raising to the political arguments playing out between councillors, this is where the decisions are challenged, shaped, and sometimes contested, although occasionally harmonious agreement does break out. So this is where we'll break down who spoke, what was said, and what it all means for Portsmouth. So welcome to the show.
Well, indeed, yes. And those who might be on the more cynical edge of the political spectrum might wonder whether in the last full council before the election happens, whether there is leaflet fodder in there, Simon. We may have seen it before. We asked the council to solve world hunger and they voted against it because they said they couldn't do it. They want the small children to starve. So we will keep half an ear open for that, just to see whether anything has a whiff of disingenuousness about it. But no, it's full councils are always worth a look. And let's see whether any questions get asked and whether any get answered. Unlike our ill-fated Prime Minister's "I'm not answering the questions" show on Wednesday.
Well, yeah, we could all be having questions and answers, but you can ask a question and I'll answer something completely different. If you're watching in portrait and want to watch in landscape, you can. I'll be sharing the links. Likewise, if you're watching in portrait and want to watch in landscape. No, the other way. Did I do that?
The other way round. Yeah, you did it the same way round.
If you want to watch the other way round.
Right, shush.
Links.
Whichever way you want to watch in portrait or landscape, Simon will share the links in the chat and you can pick your poison.
Yeah. Indeed. Okay. So, should we get straight? Should we get straight down to it? Let's go for it. Let's have a look at the agenda. But please do remember to give us some likes and comments, etc. So, full pack of things on the agenda today. We had 5 deputations from the public. Speaking about basically contributing to the various motions that we had from Viola Langley, obviously a local campaigner, friend of the pod. Steph Richards also been on the show before. So Viola was speaking against what was she speaking about? Against 11. C, I think, and Steph Richards against 11B, which was the probably the most contentious piece on the agenda today. And there were 2 contributions, one from Rachel Hudson, and I forgot the other one was in support of 11C, which was the motion about depaving, and City Alderman Alan Burnett. In support of 11D, the supporting of the high streets. So a lot to cover there. And the thing that I mentioned briefly in the intro there about the appointments, I don't know if anybody was paying attention last time. One of the appointments that was made at the last full council was the appointment of the chair of licensing. That came about because of basically the defections of the 2 remaining PIP councillors, Emily Strudwick and Lee Tyndall, joined the rest of the ex-PIPs in reform, and that meant the chair of licensing needed to be redistributed. That had been distributed to Councillor Ben Swan of Copner, but he'd decided to step away from that for personal reasons. So that needed to be reallocated. That went to Councillor Lee Hunt. There wasn't really kind of any contention about that.
Yeah.
Well, that didn't. Well, did you not? Did you
I
not like that one?
yeah, I just I mean, I think we can gloss over the personal reasons. Ben's one came under a massive
Mm,
and sustained personal attack, um, because he had been voted in to the chair role and frankly wasn't happy to take the abuse he was taking, so opted to step away. So I
mm.
just think it's important that we're clear about that rather than Ben getting voted in and just stepping away for other
Yes.
reasons. But hopefully, hopefully Lee Hunt will have a more a happier time in the chair. Although I'm sure his motivation may well be called into question as well. But we will wait and see how that unfurls.
Indeed. So moving straight down the board to number 11, the notices of motion. The first notice of motion was about cross-border taxi licensing and passenger safety. That's a motion brought by Emily Strudwick and Cllr Madgwick. They've both been quite vocal about concerns that that taxi drivers who get their license to operate from other authorities who don't have the same stringent safety requirements that the Portsmouth City Council does are able to operate within the city, because essentially the city doesn't have control and over basically who can operate here. It just has control over what requirements are necessary for the licenses that it issues. So it just to basically just quickly briefly explain it in about 30 seconds. Yes, so the current cross-border taxi private hire licensing framework allows drivers and vehicles licensed by one local authority to operate freely in other areas of England, which I guess to some degree you'd think is quite logical, because you don't want to kind of have to change taxi when you get to the border of a local authority. But it's created a national situation in which councils with the weakest licensing conditions attract the highest number of the licence applications, resulting in what many in the sector now describe as a race to the bottom in safety standards. I guess that's great if you're that council and you're charging and you're getting loads of people applying for licences there, and it's a
Well,
nice little earner,
yeah.
maybe. I don't know.
Well, let's be transparent. It's Wolverhampton. So
Okay.
we might as well call it out for what it is. I think I saw a figure that something like 40% of the private hire vehicles in Portsmouth are driving on Wolverhampton plates, and you're in a situation where things like in Portsmouth you're required to have CCTV in the car. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in Wolverhampton you're not. So there is. I read an interesting piece online from Private Hire Taxi Monthly, and even drivers were, they were not happy with that as a situation. This was a national body, but unfortunately, there is a recognition that with profits being squeezed, if owner drivers can save money by going and getting their car licensed halfway up the country, um,
Then they will.
and they can drive the car for longer and they don't have to
Mm.
put in as much safety equipment, they will. So yeah, I think it's something that there's universal agreement on,
Mm-hmm.
but this is not a good thing.
No. So the motion basically calls for the council to write to the Secretary of State for Transport and to the local government association, calling for urgent legislative change. Talks about introducing a single national licensing database and identification system for all drivers and vehicles, and mandatory CCTV in every licensed taxi and private hire vehicle in England, which is the safety measure that exists in Portsmouth but doesn't in, for example, in Wolverhampton, and a statutory requirement that all journeys must either start or end within the area of the licensing authority that issued the license. That's an interesting kind of stipulation. Do you want to take any bets on how that one went?
I would hope that that one was about as easy as it could be to fly through with unanimous approval.
It was indeed, yes. This one passed unanimously. This one, there was harmonious and obvious agreement on it. It's a rubbish situation and needs some national legislation to be able to do something about it. So chalk that one up.
Lovely.
Okay. So 11B is the one where they spent the most amount of time, which was which was the one about the Council of Sanctuary. So the actual motion itself was really, really short. I'm sorry, so the motion itself, and I'll literally read all of it because it's 2 sentences. Full Council removes immediately the Council of Sanctuary pledge until such time a full Council approved citywide consultation has taken place. Full Council agrees that group leaders must have scope on the consultation questions and full unanimous sign-off of prior to the consultation being published. So stop being Council of Sanctuary.
Yep.
And then do a survey about whether we should be Council of Sanctuary.
This has echoes. But shall we hear for the protagonists themselves before we throw our own thoughts into the pot?
Yes. Let's swing to play VT, as they say.
We would like a consultation to go out. We would like, and this consultation we've put in there, cross-party, so we can all, the group leaders can get together, decide on the consultation, we can decide on what's said, the content of it, absolutely put up the documents, make it fair, make it balanced, make it even. That's all we're asking for. And then give the people of Portsmouth the chance to have their voice officially, and we as a council should then act on that.
I just want to focus on 3 things. What Council of Sanctuary is, what the motion is asking us to do, and whether the pledge remains something that this council wants to pursue. So some people conflate Council of Sanctuary and City of Sanctuary. In fact, Lord Mayor, you've done it several times today already. City of Sanctuary is, and I quote, a national charity started in 2005 that coordinates, supports and expands a network of groups, organisations across the UK committed to creating a culture of welcome, solidarity and safety for those fleeing violence and persecution. Part of what that charity does is to offer an awards programme to further those aims. As stated on the PCC website, which you've made reference to, but I will quote, as a council, we have a responsibility to provide services to everyone who lives here and to enable everyone in Portsmouth to be contributing members of our society. The Council of Sanctuary programme provides a framework that can help streamline support being offered to anyone placed in this city. This makes it more efficient for the council to perform its legal duties to provide support. It's run by the City of Sanctuary organisation, unquote. So Council of Sanctuary status does not change anything relating to who or how many asylum seekers the government places in the city, but it would highlight the efficiency of the work that we do, for example, with the Ukrainians, Hong Kong nationals, Afghans who come to the city under government schemes, as well as those fleeing persecution.
There's absolutely no way the Labour group would support this motion. The Council of Sanctuary motion came to full council in March 2024, and during that debate, absolutely no Portsmouth Independent councillors spoke out against the motion. Very conveniently, Councillor Strudwick and Councillor Madgwick left the room before the vote happened. If you don't believe me, look at the recording. It's on YouTube. You can see it for yourselves. And then we had a vote, and all of the Portsmouth Independent councillors, as far as I remember, voted for it, including their deputy leader, Councillor Simpson. Then after that meeting, the Pitt group tried to spin that something very undemocratic had happened and suggested that there should have been a consultation or a referendum. And the hatred, division and targeting of refugees that has ensued since has been absolutely unforgivable, all for the sake of Pitt Group building its email database ahead of local elections. A member of the group has cheered on targeting the hotels refugees are housed in, which saw protests for months, with absolutely no thought that most of its residents are women and children. They've had to endure intimidating behaviour from a rent-a-mob crowds that are hell-bent on making refugees' lives a misery. We have absolutely no interest in ripping up a pledge that most councillors backed just 2 years ago, which supports some of our city's most vulnerable residents, just to provide good content for the Reform Group's election material.
Colleagues, at its core, this proposal asks us to do 2 things. First, to remove the Council of Sanctuary pledge immediately, and second, to delay any meaningful engagement with residents until a process is agreed that requires unanimous sign-off from group leaders. I believe both elements take us in the wrong direction, practically, morally and democratically. The Council of Sanctuary commitment is not an abstract political gesture. It reflects our willingness to place as a place of safety, dignity and inclusion for people who may have fled war, persecution or unimaginable hardship. Removing it immediately sends a very clear message, and I would argue the wrong one. It tells some of the most vulnerable people in our communities that their welcome here is conditional, fragile and subject to sudden withdrawal. Colleagues, is that really the message we want to send? Of course, we should listen to residents, but this motion does not simply propose consultation. It places it behind a requirement for unanimous sign-off from group leaders on the questions themselves. In practice, that creates a veto. Any one group leader could delay or block the process entirely. That is not good governance. It is a recipe for paralysis. It risks turning a genuine opportunity for public engagement into a political bottleneck. Moreover, we must ask, why remove the pledge before the consultation has even taken place? If we truly believe in listening to residents, then surely the logical approach is to maintain our current position while we seek their views, not to preempt the outcome by scrapping the pledge first.
We don't feel like this is the smart thing to do. We feel like this is the right thing to do, to give the people of Portsmouth their choice of whether they want us to be a council of sanctuary or not. And if people don't think it is the right thing to do to take out a tyrannical dictator, then you need more help than our first thought. I can assure you that if this motion does not pass today, you will be punished in the ballot boxes in May.
Performative posturing, more suited to reality TV than this city's great council chamber. Reform, in the wording, are asking for a citywide consultation without consideration for the cost, creating and running a process. Though having seen how Reform are running other councils, costings don't seem to be something they think about. They're also, my Lord Mayor, as Councillor Mason said, ignoring the fact this country is a representative, not a plebiscite democracy. We are elected to make decisions for the rest of the population. That is how democracy works in the United Kingdom.
Look, to some extent, politics is about appealing to people and understanding what people care about. But I also think as people that are elected representatives and people that are seeking to become elected representatives, we also have a responsibility to consider the impact of our actions, the impact of our words. Words do have consequences. Leaflets have consequences and policies have consequences. And when you go around stirring up division, making people become more and more fearful of their neighbours and their colleagues and the people they see walking down the street, that has real-world consequences. It has consequences for those people who are fearful, quite often without good reason, but also has massive consequences for those minority groups and those vulnerable people who have done nothing wrong. And let's be quite clear, the vast majority of people that have come to this country have done nothing wrong previously, will do nothing wrong in future, and have simply come here to escape something that is either really bad, or perhaps like my grandparents, perhaps they're not escaping something, perhaps they're coming here to contribute in search of a better life, to help support our public services, to help support our tax system. I also wanted to pick up briefly, just because it's a bugbear of mine, on something that was mentioned in the proposer's speech, this fake distinction between illegal immigrants or illegal refugees and legal refugees. Because, I mean, I would just put to them perhaps the question, what is the legal process for claiming refugee status outside of the UK? If you're saying people shouldn't come here then claim refugee status, what is the process by which they do that?
I want to take us back to when all of this stuff started, because as we've already heard, we had a debate at full council. There were only 2 or 3 people who spoke, and it passed unanimously. And as we've already heard, Councillor Madgwick, Councillor Strudwick were out of the chamber when the vote actually took place. There was no activity around it at all, and until it came to signing the pledge to work towards being a council of sanctuary. We work towards something. So working towards it has always been about making sure that the way in which we deliver the things that we are legally obliged to do by the government are done in the best way, the most empathetic way and the most efficient way possible, to say that no one who is seeking sanctuary, this is not about illegal immigrants, as much as Councillor Madgwick would like it to be, no one who is seeking sanctuary will be disadvantaged in the city of Portsmouth. So what would actually happen if this was, if we went along with reform today and this was revoked? Absolutely nothing would change. There is no work happening that is changing anything that this council would do if they were leading it in May. So they are the people misleading the electorate because they're making out that they'll do something that they won't do because there's nothing to do. The more mystifying event took place on the 15th of October 2024. That was some 7 months after the Council of Sanctuary debate had happened. After the local elections, when it wasn't fought on as an issue. But when the corporate plan was brought to the council, Lord Mayor, Cllr Madgwick and Cllr Strudwick were in the room. And they didn't object to it. Not a word said. Corporate plan included this council's pledge to work towards Council of Sanctuary. So they not only didn't oppose it at the time that it was adopted and said not one word about it, they sat in the room and allowed another document that continued the work to sail through without any objection or saying anything about it. But of course, then we weren't a few weeks away from a local election, were we?
If anybody is interested, from the survey results, obviously 97% of people that support reform are against the Council of Sanctuary, 91% of Conservatives are against the Council of Sanctuary pledge, 83% of Labour voters are against this, 61% of Liberal voters are against this, and only the Greens support it.
So just before we kind of get into our response there, so the speakers there were, it was introduced by George Madgwick. Then the next speaker was Susie Horton from the Lib Dems. Then Charlotte Gerarda, the leader of the Labour group, who also went on to make an impassioned contribution because she has familial relatives that are actually in Iran and hasn't heard from them. And there was a interruption from the public gallery during her speech. Then George Fielding. Then we heard from Joe Standen, the leader of the Reform group. And then in the clip we had Tom Coles from Labour, Cal Corkery, the independent councillor in Charles Dickens, and then the council leader, Steve Pitt. The clipping that you heard on the audio there, apologies, that's not us, that's because the microphone that they actually used, Steve's phone looked like it was close to the microphone because he was using it for notes, and that kind of causes a bit of interference. And then George closed up with his analysis of some call-outs from the survey that they'd actually done.
Yes, and I think it's important to just highlight, because there are, 78% of all statistics are made up, including this one, that the statistics that George was quoting at the end was from the PIP survey, which it would be fair to say, whilst it was independently posted on social media groups, those social media groups, I think, already had begun the transformation towards reform. So, yes, to understand that, I think, there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics. I'm sure the numbers that George gave were statistically accurate for the survey that had been targeted to a particular demographic. I guess
you mean the responses were kind of a self-selecting sample?
Yes, I mean, it's
degree,
like, yeah, there's an element of, if you stood at Fratton Park and asked the assembled whether Southampton was a wonderful place to go for a weekend, I'm sure you'd find out that 98.3% of Portsmouth residents think that Southampton is a terrible place. So there is an element of self-selection. But if we come back to, I mean, Charlotte called it out. This is just pure, unadulterated leaflet fodder. This is local election. Can we make it all about the illegal immigrants, please? And it is. It makes me quite sad, if I'm honest, because whilst and for me, this is another one of those topics which has become so polarized that no reasonable discussion takes place. And I think, that there are questions to be answered about, the process of people claiming, asylum status, which Cal touched on, the way in which people who claim asylum, the time it takes for their claim to be heard, the way in which the government assigns how many people come to Portsmouth and what they do to support and help integrate. But the piece for me which is key on this is all of those things are not in the gift of Portsmouth City Council. Absolutely nothing. It doesn't matter whether you're light blue, yellow, are you still yellow or orange? Doesn't matter. But there's nothing that the council can do. All the council can do with anybody who is here claiming sanctuary is do their absolute best to help those people integrate and to become part of the community. And why would you not?
Well, yeah, I think there were, and apologies, even though that clip was 10 minutes, I've had to be relatively ruthless about clipping out some of the contributors who talked very passionately and very personally about part of their pride in the city is its welcome, is its support for people that aren't, that people are from elsewhere. It's a naval city. It's a seafaring city. So it's quite a natural thing for a city with such a maritime heritage to have interactions with and have people settling from other countries that have come to this country and made Portsmouth their home, and that's been going on for centuries.
Yeah.
To kind of make this a kind of a recent thing. But I found it interesting to listen to the kind of the pragmatic explanations of, if you just cancelled this thing, nothing's actually really going to change, because it's not that. This is not acting like some sort of magnet to draw people across the channel to Portsmouth. That's not what's happening.
Well, and I think that's the piece that is, and that's why I was dismissive of the statistics that were wheeled out at the end there by George, because for you to understand what this is, you actually have to do some digging. You have to understand what is being offered. And for me, that is not a soundbite. Like, do you think Portsmouth should have more illegal immigrants in it? Who's going to say yes to that? So some people might say yes out of spite, and perhaps the far left, just to take an opposite position, are going to say yes. But most reasonable people are going to say no to that. But that's not what this is. So
no, but that's the trouble when you cash things in weaponizing and divisive language. It makes it hard to have that reasonable conversation. Sorry, I've interrupted you. Go on.
Yeah, no. I think what you're doing is just double underlanding the fact that this is entirely this will generate a slew of misleading leaflets that will try and move the discussion about what happens in Portsmouth to reforms main policy, one policy. It's all about the immigrants, isn't it? And I just find it I find it deeply saddening that that is the playbook, and I think I'm probably quite surprised that some of the people who were sat there in light blue, because they've found reform, having previously been independent, I'm quite surprised that they are comfortable sitting alongside that sort of divisive rhetoric.
I mean, there were, as I say, there were lots of contributions in the chamber. The only contributions for the motion came from Cllr Madgwick and from Cllr Standen, and the interventions against all came from the Liberal Democrats and from the Labour group and from the one independent councillor from Cllr. So yes, when it came to it, Joe Standen asked for called for a recorded vote, and having enough councillors to agree with him, a recorded vote took place.
Yes.
So obviously it's going to be leaflet fodder, and in regards to you can kind of almost get a sense of what the titles are, what the headline's going to be that's going to be written there. The interesting thing was that it was 10 for, 24 against, and 2 abstentions. One of the abstentions being the Lord Mayor. He doesn't characteristically vote unless there's a tie. So excuse me. And the other abstention was Hannah Brent. But interestingly, in the votes for were Spencer Gardner and Ben Swan from the Conservatives,
which is disappointing, but again, is that tactical voting, as both Spencer and we know that both Ben and Spencer are going to be targeted by reform.
Well, Spencer's not up this time. It's Simon Bosher that's up in Drayton and Farlington. But yes,
perhaps,
Ben is
perhaps
like you say, that might be a deflection of a targeted leaflet rather than a real response. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know what.
And no, we can speculate. We know that not within Portsmouth, but at the national level, some Conservatives have chosen to cross the floor. Who knows? Maybe Spencer is that's what Spencer truly believes. But from a personal perspective, glad to see it defeated. It's that element of, and it's that piece where it's not what was being portrayed, and I think that intention to mislead, I think is disappointing. So let's move on to something more positive, perhaps.
Yes. So 11C depaving in Portsmouth. Now, what's depaving, you ask?
I do.
Okay, so this talks about urban areas as part of our ecosystems. And then each part of the system is interrelated with the rest, and that healthy soil underpins the resilience of ecosystems and are essential for life. And essentially, with the growing climate emergency and biodiversity crisis, there is concern of the restriction or the reduction in the amount of naturally draining surfaces that wildlife can live in, that contributes to the biodiversity. And if things are paved, then that creates a negative effect with rain runoff and flooding, essentially. That runoff leading to high volumes of overflow to our water system, which is also something obviously that we see quite often. So this one just calls for, this one was proposed by Councillor Judith Smyth and seconded by Councillor George Fielding, and it's basically calling for the Leader of the Council to write to the Secretary of State of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs to request more legislation and to publish national standards and to set some criteria around de-sealing of floor surfaces in the country, and also asking the Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Greening the City to develop de-sealing targets for the city. So essentially, there should probably be less paved surfaces. Can we have some way of measuring that? And can we have some legislation that helps push towards putting the balance back the other way?
One important factor not mentioned in that, which is once you've dug up your paved surfaces and turned them into green spaces, the amount of maintenance you have to do on a paved space as a council is quite low, and the amount of maintenance you need to do on a growing space is more significant. So whilst it's noble, there was no mention of money in there.
No, but I think, I mean, even round in the area that we live, I don't know about you, but I find it quite frustrating that most of the pavements have been turned over to become access routes and therefore are no longer levelled surfaces and then actually parked over by people with their cars who are too lazy or selfish to park on their own driveway. When actually a pavement should be a pavement, and even when there is interruptions between a dropped curb and the next dropped curb, people are driving their SUV over them and kind of dragging kind of mud, destroying the grass.
I prefer
all these people paving their front gardens.
Yeah,
you know,
I did well. Yes. We'll have to. He glances to his left into his garden, which is now it's a mixture of paving and grass, but the grass might be more artificial than is ideal. But anyway, yes. So I obviously I don't think anything contentious there, apart from those of us that have paved and artificial grass gardens. But everybody else much more responsible. I take it that one flew through.
It did indeed, yes. It did indeed. So the next one was 11D, pride in our high streets. So we've got a clip on that one. Let's listen to that one.
I rise today to move this motion on restoring pride in our high streets, shutting down dodgy shops and protecting the future of Portsmouth's high streets. Let me start with something we can all agree on. The overwhelming majority of businesses in our city are honest, hard-working and play by the rules. They serve our communities, employ local people and help make Portsmouth a vibrant place to live and visit. But alongside them, there is a growing problem that residents talk to us about again and again. A small number of shops that simply do not play by the rules. Residents see it on their local high streets, rogue vape shops selling unsafe products, sometimes to young people, so-called cowboy barbers operating outside regulation, and fake American candy stores selling overpriced or non-compliant goods. These businesses undercut legitimate traders who are paying their taxes, following the rules and contributing properly to our local economy. And in some cases, these premises are not just bad businesses, they are fronts for wider criminal activity. According to the National Crime Agency, more than £12 billion is lost every year through low-level cash-based money laundering in the UK. That damages our local economy, drives away families and shoppers, and undermines pride in our communities. Because our high streets should feel safe, vibrant places where families want to spend time, not places dominated by shops that exist to rip people off or skirt the law. If you are ripping off customers, exploiting loopholes, or putting young people at risk, your days operating on our high streets should be numbered. Portsmouth deserves thriving high streets we can be proud of, and today we have the opportunity to clearly say that this council will stand up for our communities, our legitimate businesses, and the future of our city.
I also want to take a moment to commend the excellent work of Portsmouth City Council's trading standards team, who continue to work closely with the police and partners to tackle rogue trading in our city. Their dedication was rightly recognized with a prestigious national award last year for their work tackling the illegal trade in counterfeit goods. Their efforts help protect residents and support legitimate businesses that are the backbone of our local economy.
Your notice of motion is correct to recognise that we need tougher legislation. There is absolutely no question about it. People are fed up with the vape shops. There's no doubt about it at all. And I go online a lot on Facebook when they start complaining, oh yeah, you've shut it down. I thought it was like whack-a-mole. You shut one down and another one or two pop up next door, further down the street. That is not the fault of the trading standards team. It's not my fault. It is not the council's fault. It is the fact that the legislation is not there to be more tough.
So,
who did we have there?
So there we had George Fielding introducing the motion. We had Yinka Adeniran, who'd seconded the motion, and Lee Hunt also kind of speaking to the motion. So it's an interesting, in that it's a Labour motion calling on us to support the MPs, the local MPs, both of whom, in case anyone isn't familiar with the area, are Labour MPs, to call on government to introduce stronger legislative powers, enabling local authorities and enforcement agencies to close down high street premises engaged in criminal or repeat unlawful activity. Kind of be interested to know what powers they don't have to do that. It kind of seems that Councillor Hunt was speaking to, the issue isn't being able to tackle them in the first place. It's actually the fact that they can just start another business and off they go again.
And again, I've been following, Councillor Hunt's done a lot of work with trading standards in this area, and there have been a number of high profile where trading standards have raided a business. They have found them selling illegal tobacco products or illegal vapes. They've gone to court, they've been fined, they've been warned. Trading standards have gone back, they've got them again. And I think there was one recently where there is now the ability for them to apply for a closure notice, which means that that premises will be closed for 3 months. I guess for me, Simon, I think we really need to do a future show on this if we can find somebody clever enough who understands how it works. So we both live in Cosham, suburb in the north of Portsmouth, and up until the pandemic, we had one barber who every man in Cosham went to get their hair cut. I found during the pandemic I could shave my head with clippers, but that was the Cosham barbers. As of today, there are 12 barbers in Cosham. Now, I don't know whether the men of Cosham have become much hairier over those 5 years, but there is no way that those dozen barbers are legitimate businesses that are operating, covering their costs based on cutting people's hair legally. Now, I guess there's that element of, we talk about planning control. Cosham does not have a need for more barbers, but I don't believe the council has any powers to stop you or I opening the Pompey Politics podcast barbers tomorrow. Even
I think
though
one of us would be better at trimming people's hair than the other.
Well, you don't. Just because I'm blind, that would be a hate crime. You judge
No,
me.
I'm thinking that
I know,
I'm as clumsy
probably
as
actually
hell.
would be you. Yes, but I guess so. There is that piece where unless the council can intervene and stop, these businesses from springing up. And there was a thread a couple of threads that broke out online. Oh, they get a £30,000 grant from the government to set these up. And several people pointed to the fact that that's a conspiracy theory, but I don't understand how this is happening, and how businesses which clearly are not viable, 11 or 12 barbers, 10 nail bars, eight tattoo studios, and whatever the number of convenience and vape shops are now. I don't know how that is happening when clearly those are not legitimate legal businesses that are making a living from trading honestly. And I just pause in case there are lawyers involved. Obviously, some of those businesses will be trading legally. They're not all illegal or not all breaking the law. But they simply cannot all be operating legitimately.
I guess it's kind of hard to understand. And I guess this is the anecdotal evidence that people will have from their own perception, is that their perception is that quite often they'll pass these places and they're very rarely serving customers, or they're very rarely very busy. So how is there demand for so many of them to be that underutilized?
Well, and this is
it kind of doesn't quite make sense, does it?
Well, none of it makes sense.
And the shame is it also crowds out. That's another shop, another business that would add some variety to the high street is essentially being crowded out or priced out of operating from. So I guess there's a wider question of, do we want councils to be able to say this particular section of the commercial activity, we only want this percentage of operators to be of this type of operator? Do we want them to kind of get into that, or do we just how do you? I don't quite know how you could do it without kind of getting into the weeds of it.
Yeah,
because we don't really want councils deciding what type of shop goes where, because they're, to be blunt, they're phenomenally crap at that. But at the same time, surely something should exist, because market forces would normally say you wouldn't get this kind of overabundance of a particular type of retailer or operation, because they just wouldn't. No one will be able to afford to operate. So, how is that?
And I think this is one of those things which we can universally agree, irrespective of party politics, that it is wrong. The solution of it needs to be bigger, because there is obviously something happening which is not legitimate.
It's something doesn't add up, and it's very questionable. I'm being more delicate.
You are, but I'm sorry. I'm prepared to go further, because when I used to go and get my hair cut at the barbers in Cosham, there were not queues of people round the block such that an entrepreneur might say, good Lord, those people, there are so many people needing a haircut.
There's a demand here not
There's
being
a
met.
demand here for at least another 10 barbers to take up the slack.
Yeah, it's a conundrum of the age, and one of the public deputations talked about vape shops and about the prevalence of those. They were talking about Albert Road and about the number of those, and how some of those aren't necessarily observed to be selling things, selling basically compliant products, and potentially selling them to underage customers. So yes, something definitely kind of needs looking at there. The motion also mentions, so other than basically calling on their MPs to basically pressure for legislative changes, calling on the Cabinet Member of Community Centre, Leisure and Sport to consider a report within 6 months detailing out certain criteria, but also establishing a High Streets Advisory Board to guide the council on how to use new powers as they become law. I guess that's a kind of thing to do once you've actually got some new powers in the pipeline. But yeah, so we move on to 11E?
Yes. I take it that one passed.
Oh, sorry, yes. That one passed unanimous, or in Gerald's words, the Lord Mayor's words, it was unanimous in the voices of those who expressed a view. I guess other people didn't seem to be bothered, but also weren't up for kind of registering their vote. So 11E was the supporting Portsmouth veterans. This is from Councillor Steve Pitts, the leader of the council, and seconded by Darren Sanders. So there was also an amendment to this one, which was an amendment from Councillors Fazackley and Madgwick, basically calling on some change to the wording to involve some other key stakeholders, essentially to interact with regarding veterans affairs. And you'll hear from what Councillor Fazackley says in the clip. So I'm just going to play the clip.
This is what a friend of mine said. Having grown up as a military child and now as a military wife, I can speak from first-hand experience about the impact that service life has on families. When I was younger, I remember very clearly the lack of support and understanding my mother and I often received from schools and employers when my father's deployments were unexpectedly extended. These extensions frequently occurred at particularly difficult times, such as during exam periods or school holidays, when stress levels were already high. At that time, there was very little recognition of the pressures military families faced. The reality of our situation was rarely acknowledged, and we were often simply expected to carry on and manage as best we could. Now, you might guess that my friend is Councillor Oliver. Now, she has to cope with being that military wife. Her husband is on duty as I speak. No one quite knows where, but I think we can guess. And that matters to them, and it matters to their family. They've got a daughter, as many of you know. And as Councillor Oliver says, my mother shielded me from many of the challenges when I was young, just as I now try to protect my daughter, my own daughter, from some of the uncertainties that come with it. Uncertainties. I think you could call that an understatement. The challenges many of us face in balancing helping our community with the pressure of a job, in my view, mean nothing when you never know if the person you love is coming home. There are many, many misconceptions around veterans and housing. One of them is that this city has loads of veterans living on the streets. Well, this council, at our insistence, includes armed forces status in its annual homelessness count, the one that has to go to government. And the most recent such count in 2025 identified nil, nada, zero veterans living on the streets. And that's not an anomaly, I am told, by the council's housing team.
He's got direct experience of representing his country, serving his country. He was wounded during the course of that service, and he's established many contacts across the military network and military family. When he worked very recently for a military charity. So, and I'm pretty sure that with all that experience and Joe's contacts, he'll bring a great deal to the role.
Because I think often there's a misunderstanding or miscommunication about the amount of support that Portsmouth City Council offers to our veterans community. And I think it's really sad, because actually Portsmouth is known as the leading council in the whole country for the support that it gives to veterans.
So Darren Sanders speaking at the beginning there, Jason Vazakli on reform speaking there, suggesting that Joe Standen, as a veteran, be basically involved in the measures that they're taking there. But essentially, the motion's calling for the Armed Forces Champion and the deputies to write to the Minister for Veterans and People in support of the Royal British Legion's Keep the Covenant Promise campaign, and calling for more improved statutory guidance and funding to all public bodies in the scope of those aims, and to ask the UK government to implement a dedicated programme of promotional activity on the Armed Forces Covenant. So a very, very important thing for the city and for its people. Good to hear that that veterans aren't showing up as part of the homelessness population in the city. And that there's good recognition there.
Yeah, and I know I spoke very negatively about reform earlier, and some of the people involved. You know, I've seen a lot of Joe Standen's content online before he joined reform, and Joe's always had a passion for veterans. He's served as a Marine himself, and I think this is where there is the opportunity to look at this through the positive lens of, you know, Portsmouth is good at this. How can it be better? And I think that's you know, when energy and focus is put into that, and it is that's something that is a lot more unifying, and potentially more people can get behind. So how did the vote go, Simon?
So the amendment was subsumed.
Yep. Good.
And as I'm sure is a shock to no one, the motion passed unanimously.
Fabulous.
So there was no one speaking against that. So the last notice of motion was 11F, the public health grant for substance misuse support and treatment. I've got a quick clip there, but it's talking about the council expressing its disappointment on a year-on-year reduction of the financing for the public health grant to deal with substance misuse. So I'll play the clip.
When this came through, I was asking why was this that we have some really, really fantastic outcomes for our drug and alcohol treatment services. We make a real difference, and we are seen as an exemplar in the South East region. And the answer was, well, we've underfunded other places chronically. This is we, as in the government, so not this government, just all governments, over basically since 2013, when public health came back to local authorities. So they've chronically underfunded places like Hampshire and Kent and Essex and all those big counties, to the extent that Hampshire County Council, over about 6 times the population of Portsmouth, gets the same, up until this year, gets about the same money as we do for drug and alcohol services. So they don't have 6 times the need, because we have more need in the city per capita, but they certainly have more need than Portsmouth overall, but their funding was less.
Let me begin with something many people get wrong. Addicts do not use substances to have fun. They do not wake up to choose chaos, misery, or self-destruction. They're used because sobriety without proper support can be unbearable. Addiction is not a series of bad decisions, it is an illness, a mental and physical illness. Mentally, addiction is like having a mind that has turned against you, a darkness that grows inside of you, that fills you with fear, anxiety, shame, self-loathing, depression, so heavy and so relentless that even simple things like breathing, standing, or even existing can feel like a battle. And in that state, the only respite addicts know, the only moment of quiet, the only moment where the mind stops attacking itself, comes from using a substance. Not because they want to, not because they enjoy it, but because momentarily it silences the torture. It gives them, for a few fleeting moments, a sense of ease and comfort that those without addiction feel every day. But of course, the moment they use, the physical part of the illness takes over.
Having a chat on the phone, I said, I'm never going to remember all this. Can you please do me a brief note? And he very kindly agreed to do a brief note. And I don't disagree with what Councillor Winnington has said in terms of the funding situation, that the public health core grant is going up, but it's quite small in 26-27 and around about 2% or just over in the following years, 27, 28, 28, 29. And there is actually a reduction in the other two grants. What is interesting, though, is I think the figures for 27, 28, 28, 29 are what they call indicative. So there is a potential for that to change. They are indicative figures.
Sorry there. Councillor Graham Heaney's bit at the end, I didn't realise the volume was quite low on that. So you heard from Matthew Winnington and from Nick Dorrington of the Lib Dems, and then Graham Heaney at the end there. So...
Nick has spoken very passionately and
Yes.
openly in the past about his own struggles with addiction. It is one of those things where it's a topic that we are, societally starting to kind of understand more. Mental illness, depression, I think, was almost considered a taboo subject at one point, and I think addiction is, it is something that as I think Nick put very passionately there, it's an illness that needs a cure, not a choice that needs to be judged or derided.
No, indeed. There was an amendment submitted by Councillor Heaney and Gerarda, basically calling on a removal of an alter to kind of point one of the motion, but that amendment fell. It wasn't subsumed. It fell at the vote, and then the overall the motion unamended passed unanimously. So that kind of went through. And then they went quickly. I'll very, very quickly mention they went on to the members' questions. There were 3 questions. One from Cllr Smyth, asking the chair of the Governance and Audit Standards Committee, Cllr Ian Holder, about essentially investment in organisations that have perhaps links with types of other investment that the council wouldn't want to be associated with. So concerns of particular, example that they used was Barclays Bank, and the concerns about around those and funding of armaments in controversial situations. We're talking about investment portfolios that such as armaments that might be used in Palestine, for example. And essentially, the conversation went along the lines of Councillor Holder was saying they do a review if they find that basically the investment is calling into question, then they'll try to exit from that as quickly as they can. And then as a follow up, Councillor Smyth asked for a more detailed report to come back, basically, which Councillor Holder agreed to. The next one was George Fielding to Councillor Candlish, the cabinet member for the transport. The question was, could the cabinet member for transport please provide an update regarding planned traffic schemes, road safety schemes across the city, and any backlog issues? To which he said yes.
Right.
And then Councillor Fielding needed to use a follow-up question, and then he got into a conversation about the pile of paperwork that he'd bought and talked about some specific ones. But it's kind of hard to give I think that was kind of worth just mentioning that, because it was a point of you probably need to be a bit more specific, or rather than expect someone in a council meeting to reel off an update of every single line item in the traffic and transportation. And then the third one was from Councillor Judith Smyth, asking Councillor Ashmore for the Environment Services what's being done to improve the recycling rates in the city. And Councillor Ashmore talked a bit about how other councils are including their garden waste as part of their recycling, and essentially agreed to bring back kind of more reporting to talk about that. So I think there's a bit of a theme there that, because those questions all, basically the three questions came from two councillors, both of whom are up for re-election. So to agree, there's a bit of kind of gentle kind of leaflet inclusion of these are things I've done in my ward kind of stuff, which everybody's keen to do as they face the weirdest interview in the world, which is the election process.
Well, indeed, yes, and obviously, as we do every year, we will be covering this in detail. We will begin to fire the starting gun to see whether we can get people to sign up for the hustings, and we will be broadcasting live in the dead of night on May the 7th. And yes, we've got it down to a fine art now. I think originally it was 8 cases of equipment, and it was. But I think I think we got our snack levels right last time, and we will be absolutely focused once again. So
we didn't run out of Haribo. We didn't.
No,
we were fine.
No, there was enough sugar. We were all good. Well, and an interesting melange, bit of leaflet fodder in there, some really positive stuff that everybody could get behind, and isn't it nice when all of the good stuff kind of everyone says, yeah, that's something we should do. So we will celebrate that, and thank you for listening. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I have been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I have been Simon Sainsbury. Don't forget to give us a like, follow, subscribe, etc. wherever you are finding the podcast, or give us a comment if you're just listening to the audio. We'll see you. We've got the PMQs on Wednesday, but otherwise we'll be taking a break for the Sundays until
Easter.
For the break for Easter, and then we'll start publishing details of the hustings. See you soon. Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn. Remember, the deadline to register to vote in May's local elections is 11:59 p.m. on Monday the 20th of April. Use the QR code on screen to take you to the Electoral Commission's website, where there are further details about registering to vote, as well as information where you can confirm where you would need to vote if you're voting in person on the day. Other deadlines apply to register for postal or proxy voting. Don't forget, if you're voting in person on May the 7th, you'll need to take photo ID to be able to vote. If you're not sure what photo ID counts, scan the QR code on screen or go to the Electoral Commission's website, where there are further details, including information about how to apply for a free voter authority certificate, which you will be able to use to vote in person on the day.